Good evening, Western Standard viewers, and welcome to Hannaford, a weekly politics show of the Western Standard. It is Thursday, June the 18th. Joining us today is David Knightleg, a strategic advisor to the Alberta government, energy, and financial services firms, and he is no stranger to the Western Standard. Good to have you back, David.
Great to be back.
David, I think you're coming into us from Abu Dhabi today. I won't ask you what you're doing there, but did you manage to stay safe during all the recent nastiness?
It's they threw more missiles and Shahed drones at the UAE than any other country, including Israel. This country is phenomenal and very resilient. So you're pretty safe in Abu Dhabi or Dubai.
Okay, good. Glad you're in one piece. David, polls suggest more than half of Canadians would like to join the European Union. Do you buy that?
No.
Okay, so what do you think makes Canadians say yes to a question like that?
I think because it's a very low risk question, and I think it's a sentimental question. I think that Canadians are getting more tired of the anti-Americanism, of the elbows up concept, and I think that the idea of being positive about being united with countries through trade makes a lot of sense. And I think if you ask a lot of people, what do you mean when you say you like the idea of being joined to the European Union, they probably think about an economic community very similar to the EEC. I don't think anybody wants Brussels making any decisions about anything happening anywhere in Canada ever. So I think it's a classic kind of polling question. It's an informed question. I think if you ask people, do you want Canada to be on the first manned flight to Mars? They'd probably say yes too, but there's costs to that. There's preparation to that. Like, there's a series of things that I think we aspire to as a nation, which are good things. And what I sense is that the nation wants to move out of the malaise and the decline of the last decade that they feel and see every day. And I think they are also frustrated by feeling like we're under the thumb of the United States as it goes through a more assertive positioning on defense, energy security, and trade security. And I think that the government has sort of fueled, sadly, I think a sense of insecurity in people that is now being tapped when you're asked, do you want to be part of the European Union? Do you want to be part of... Look, if you ask people, do you want to be part of the largest free trade corridor in the planet with the lowest taxes? I think the vast majority would say yes. All of these things have costs, and I prefer, and I think our natural geography, history, legal system, economy, politics, structure, culture, educational backgrounds, integration of military and logistical assets. There's only one country we have to be integrated with. There's only one country we can be integrated with in any functional way. It's the United States. The problem is you need a philosophy of governance, and you need a philosophy of personal and cultural identity as a nation and as citizens that will lead to a sense that can be done on positive, healthy, peer-to-peer terms. And I think that the dialogue needs to be raised on that front. And I think, President Trump has thrown down the gauntlet in ways that have turned off Canadians. And I think the reaction has been one that I have disagreed with. And frankly, one that I see changing now. I thought Mark Carney's speech to the Economic Club of New York and his interview with Nader Moussavezadeh there was a smart change. I thought Mark Carney's recent comments on the Iran war just today out of the G7 meeting in France were a welcome change. I think that the Prime Minister's office is getting a smarter team together, and I think they're doing a better job of defending Canadian interests in bringing us to a place where hopefully we can achieve a much better economic and energy security and military deal with the Americans.
Well, let's hope that's the case. He certainly has paid a tremendous amount of attention to Europe. In the 15 months he's been in office, he's been there 9 times. He's been to Great Britain a couple of times, and as you mentioned, he was just there in France earlier this week at the G7. Now, this is just Dr. Grock speaking, but it looks to me like he spends as much time in Europe as Toronto or Western Canada. Now, we understand he's doing this to spite President Trump, I think, but Europe's a mess. Their combined debt in US dollars is like 15 trillion US dollars, and they have 3 times that in unfunded liabilities because they all retire at 50, and then there's the pension liabilities to fund a 30-year holiday at the end of a 25-year working life. So a lot of them, their national debt is more than their GDP. Greece is 146%. So I don't want to sort of go into a long list of numbers and eyes glaze over, but really, Europe is a mess. Is this actually a smart place for Canada to be anyway?
Look, I think there are places and ways that we do deals with everyone in the world. I think there are places and ways we do deals with China without wanting to be like China. I think we do deals with Europe where it benefits Canadians. I think that the problem with the Prime Minister's trips to Europe is not that Europe isn't an important partner or set of partners. It's that it's disproportionate to the biggest economic opportunity, which is, if you look at the numbers, depending on how you count them, between sort of 77 and 80% of, and sometimes it's up and down a little bit, but marginally 80% of all of our trade is with the United States. The next largest trading partner we have is China, and that's 4.5%. After that, everything is fractional. And so the point of the last sort of year and a half has been, if you know that you have to do the best deal of your lifetime with the United States, and the United States has released 3 or 4 very key documents in the last year and a half, the national security strategy. They've talked about their trade strategy. You have the Hudson's Bay Capital strategy paper, Mar-a-Lago, back in November of 2024. It's very clear what their agenda is, and it's very clear where Canada can fit into that agenda. And there are a dozen things that we can do positively and constructively to prepare for a game-changing generational opportunity for a freer trade relationship with the United States. So I don't begrudge the Prime Minister making the choices that he and his team make of where he spends his time. I think the most important thing is, what is the strategy for building the best generational opportunity for economic progress in Canada's history with the Americans? And, as you know, I live in DC part of the time. The reputation of the Canadians there is very poor. I think it will improve under Ambassador Wiseman and under the person they brought in now to do the some of the negotiation strategy. But we're late to the game, very late to the game. The Mexicans have been at it. They have big teams in multiple places. They're working very hard. The Canadians have been known for being missing in action. And that sort of gossip in DC is also reflected in conversations that you see, in editorial pages as well. So I think the biggest thing, Nigel, is not whether or not the Prime Minister loves and wants to be in Europe and have good conversations with the Europeans about a variety of things. I just think that it represents the potential for there to be a disproportionate focus on a place that happens to have, most of the countries are poorer than the poorest state, Mississippi. Canada is as poor as the poorest state, Mississippi, if you take Alberta out of the equation, right? Like we have a fundamental problem of a welfare state society that's built itself up for 20 years on deeper and deeper debt commitments, and just unparalleled immigration levels, offering people benefits that have become so attractive that there's deep amounts of fraud connected to the benefits process. You see this in Canada, you see it in the UK, you see it in Italy, you see it in France, Germany, Holland, Sweden. Sweden is now starting to reverse it. But I think that the Prime Minister and his team have got to focus on the most important game. And the most important game is, what is going to happen to the world's largest integrated economy of Canada and the United States? And how will that be prosecuted over the next sort of several months? And nothing that we do in Europe is going to make a difference to this economy of any substance at all. Nothing.
Yeah.
So
we had during the Harper era, we've signed a free trade agreement with the European Union. And, the terms were good, and I don't see that that in itself has made much difference either.
No, it's okay. These things are all good. There's nothing wrong with them. And you don't want to get snarky about good accomplishments by people that are trying to make the country work. And I think when you get a win, you take a win. If there are plausible ways for Canada to be integrated in a variety of ways with Europeans. I think the most important integration, there are 5 or 6 things that I think are obvious One of them obviously would be Canada should become a member of AUKUS, the Australian, UK, US submarine warfare integrated strategy. We have the largest coastline. We have the one that's most exposed to both China and Russia. We have said that we're going to make an increasing commitment to a defense strategy and funding of it. And yet we sit on the outside of something that's got the three most important members of the Five Eyes, and we're missing an action with the largest coastline. It makes no sense at all. We are having conversations about, Gripen jets, which is fine. Those are good patrol jets, but they are easily taken out of the sky by the fifth generation Chinese and Russian fighters that would be the ones that our pilots would be facing in an air-to-air combat scenario. So the question is, why are these conversations happening about moving away from an already existing F-35 commitment instead of saying, in addition to our F-35 commitment, we may have a series of patrol jets? In the UAE, they have a few different sets of military equipment suppliers that are interoperable with the states that they have to have aligned interests with. That makes a lot of sense. Canada can do these things, but somehow the temptation to have an anti-American wrapper or veneer on some of these conversations has become really problematic, because it's conveyed a deep sort of cultural, political, and economic insecurity that I think it dominates on the left in Canada. And it's created an antagonism that generates votes because President Trump is a very divisive figure. So it works, quote unquote, politically. But when you're creating a strategy, a generational strategy for a country, you can't reduce that strategy to the optics or PR elements of an anti-Trump dynamic in your base.
Well, let's just say, David, that I think I agree with you 100% here, but clearly there is a sentiment in Canada, especially in Eastern Canada. You don't find it out west so much, which they don't understand the big picture. All they know is that they don't like Trump very much. In fact, they really despise him in many cases.
Yeah.
And Mr. Carney can hold on to his base by simply echoing that point of view. So it could be a cynical, stupid little exercise in Canadian politics. That's one possibility. The other is, and I think you may have an observation on this, that Mr. Carney actually feels intellectually more at home among European leaders. And so he's got this default to lean in that direction. The problem is, between the pulling of the Eastern base that doesn't like Trump and the pushing of Mr. Carney's own intellectual preferences, we're ending up going down a wrong path and ignoring the main game, which I think is what you're saying. But do you want to just sort of go into, does Mr. Carney actually feel happier talking to Macron?
Look, I think I draw a distinction. First of all, you have to be careful, I think, especially when I'm a conservative, and obviously Prime Minister Carney is a liberal. And so it's easy to sort of, for me to sit back and have a perspective that is obviously politically oppositional to his perspective. But I think the more important question would be if Prime Minister Carney said, David, I want you on the team helping do a trade deal for Canada because, I'm going to be in office for another few years until you guys get better at your own messaging and PR in the conservative side. And President Trump is only going to be in office for a short period of time. And, we are going to be negotiating a trade deal that has the potential to completely change the dynamics of a generation in terms of a more open, free trade, integrated energy, integrated military, integrated data system, more closely aligned legal, cultural dynamics, greater agreement on creating the largest free trade zone in the planet. That to me is the most exciting single opportunity anywhere. And to waste that opportunity for small vol political gains, or to waste it by being focused on deeply secondary economies that are involved with less than a single % of our trade is such a lost opportunity for a generational moment. And it's a generational moment that has to be above the specific politics. You have to be a political realist when you're in office. Of course, you have to maintain the support of your base. You have to maintain the integration of your caucus. You have to maintain a tight, smart cabinet. He's got a lot of work to do, I think, in sort of holding his red jersey team together. But at the end of the day, the opportunity that he will look back on in his life, and I think the country will look back on in the moment, is what did you do with the opportunity we had in front of us to negotiate something that could have been generational for Canada and Canadians? And the only place that you could focus on that matters in that respect is the United States. Nothing else is even close. Nothing is close. And so it's sort of making an argument from proportionality, Nigel. It's saying, if you have a business and 80% of your client base is in one place in dealing with one set of issues, you want to address that. The 4% in China is another group, but after that, it's very, very fractional. So to answer your question from the outside, I think probably Prime Minister Carney does have a better natural affinity, both ideologically and politically, with people that are part of the center left, crowd that he knows very well. Keir Starmer probably fits that group. Some of the Scandinavian leaders fit that mold. Macron obviously fits that mold. But I think that's neither here nor there. They don't matter. France is almost irrelevant to Canada apart from very specific trading issues. If you look at how you're going to spend the next several months negotiating a trade deal for the future.
So what are you expecting to see out of the Prime Minister's office in terms of messaging during the next 6 months, now to Christmas?
I think there's been an important shift in the Prime Minister's office. I think that there was a I don't know if you saw this, but there was a moment I reacted and posted something on it, taking the post down in order to sort of be more focused on what's helpful. But I just really don't like the elbows up theme at all. I didn't like the War of 1812 theme with the little figurine that Mike Myers had given the Prime Minister. I thought it made us look feckless and weak. I thought it conveyed deep cultural and political insecurity. I thought it played to the worst instincts of the center left and leftist base in Canada at the expense of getting things done with a party that is dominant in the House, the Senate, the White House in the United States. And so when you look at those things, you want to say tactically, what does the moment require? And I think that the speech at the Economic Club of New York showed that the Prime Minister and his office, and by the way, I thought it was an exceptional speech, has taken seriously the need to focus very directly on the generational opportunity of a great trade agreement with the United States. I think that's happening. The Prime Minister is very good at speaking to the audience. He was in New York. He was at the Economic Club. His interlocutor was a great guy named Nader Musavizadeh, who I know, who's a friend, and he's a very close friend of the Prime Minister's. And I thought he asked exceptionally good questions, and I thought the themes and the messages were very strong. The thing is, you got to translate that from sentiment to terms of a deal. And I think Canada has an incredible opportunity right now to do a really good deal with the United States. But it's going to involve energy security, which will obviously involve Alberta. It's going to involve military security, which I think is going to require us to stop revisiting already signed contracts and actually expand some contracts. I think it's going to involve AUKUS at some point and should. I think it's going to involve data. I think it's going to involve quantum systems. I think it's going to involve a lot more integration, operational integration. And through all of that sort of core, functional, focused military integration, which you don't want to play around with, having an elbows up mentality is the last thing we need. There's not a chance that we can defend this country without the full support of the United States. Our armed forces are probably in the worst state they've ever been in the history of the country. We currently have less than 50% force readiness. Our Air Force is down to 40% force readiness. We're missing absolutely critical parts of our core supply chain. You cannot have any of these conversations with the United States of an integrated trade, military, and energy security strategy without addressing the massive, deep structural problem of a military that's completely fallen apart. Same problem that the UK is facing in terms of their contribution right now. So Nigel, I think it's a question of priorities. I think this Prime Minister is very smart. I understand his affinity for Europe. I think that there's a reason why Canadians like the idea of doing a deal with Europe, but I don't think it's an either or deal. I think if you ask most Canadians, would you like to do a deal, a great open deal with Mexico? Probably a majority would say yes, absolutely. But I think the focus right now has got to be on what we do with the United States, and it's tricky. How does a center left government and someone, who is part of sort of the Davos community do a deal with Donald Trump credibly when there's the deep antithesis around the operating assumptions and some of the governance assumptions of those two political philosophies? And that's
well, I think, David, actually, the thing that concerns us here in Alberta is how does he do a deal with our own government? There's a lot riding on the relationship between Ottawa and Danielle Smith's government here in Alberta to do the very thing that you're talking about with the United States. Is this good for Alberta?
I think there's 5 or 6 very obvious quick wins. I posted an op-ed on the National Post recently saying, China lost over 500,000 barrels of heavy Venezuelan crude. It just so happens that Alberta's heavy crude is the chemically identical cousin of that Venezuelan crude. We have already blueprinted and know the exact a 565,000 barrel pipeline that was called Northern Gateway. We know exactly where it would go. We can expedite that and do a hard power, soft power deal with the Chinese. It makes a lot of sense for Canada, makes a lot of sense for the Chinese. They're desperate for it, especially because their other alternative is Iranian crude, which is in a totally different category now. And it's closest, it's lowest cost landed, and it puts Canada in a position of having, an important part in the Chinese energy security story, which the Americans can appreciate. And that's what sovereign countries do. We do a deal that we can do with the Chinese for a specific thing that the Americans have taken away from them with what they did by renditioning Maduro and taking over the assets in Venezuela. And I think that, so that's one positive thing that we can move on right away. But what I don't see is I still see the federal Liberal Party being addicted to the PR sentimentalism of an environmental movement that has done absolutely nothing for global emissions or the planet, but continues to insist on economy devastating moves like C-48, C-69, and a whole host of sort of consultative ideas that are effectively blank checks to very, very small minorities that are easily led or bought off by people that are oppositional to the building of global energy infrastructure. And so as a nation, I think we have to get serious about the fact that we are one of the world's largest, most important energy superpowers. Alberta is. Under the Constitution of Canada, Alberta owns the oil and the gas. It does. It is the largest single and wealthiest democracy in the planet. 4.5 million people, $12 to $15 trillion worth of these assets. It is wealthier than Qatar. It has as much gas as Qatar. It's got more oil than the United States and Russia combined. It is the single most, it's 6 times the size of Great Britain. It has a massive deposit. Everything that you can give a country, Alberta has, and it's right next door to the world's largest consuming economy, the United States. It's a place that instantly would become Ireland with 10 times the cash.
So David, we're out of time. Last question, just a short shot here. Will you be surprised if Albertans vote in October to have a referendum on independence?
I think the most interesting thing will be what happens to the first 9 questions. I think that's something people are overlooking and they should look at a lot more closely, because I think those first 9 questions are questions that most other Canadians and most other provinces wish their premiers would allow them also to vote on. I think the direct democracy as a process is an important consideration and commitment, and I think Alberta is doing a great job of doing it. I think the vote to have a referendum is going to be very close to a 50-50. I think that events will determine whether it becomes a 60-40 in one direction or the other. But I think you've definitely got a third that will say no matter what. You've got a third that will say yes no matter what. And you've got a third in the middle that are going to be very sort of consider it. I think there are a lot of people that are federalists that are certainly going to vote to have the referendum. And I think that's the wild card. And I think the Prime Minister's office is aware of that. And I think they're trying to figure out who the right voices are to have that conversation and talk about it without creating the sort of dynamics that you've seen in some of the other independence movements recently.
Well, David, I know it's hot in Abu Dhabi. It's going to be a long, hot summer here in Alberta as well. I want to thank you for taking the time, joining us. Your insights are always incredibly valuable. Thank you very much.
Great to see you.
And for the Western Standard, I'm Nigel Hannaford.